Hello everybody, welcome. Hope you're having all a good Dreamforce. It's almost over, so keep on fighting for this last day. My name is Philippe Ozil. I'm a developer advocate here. And today, I'm going to give you a tour of what you can do to build on Data Cloud and on the newer Einstein functionalities that are part of the Agentforce family. Before I do so, I have a couple of slides which are fairly standard. I'm sure you've seen those a number of times already. The typical forward-looking statement, because some of what I'm going to cover is still beta or on the roadmap, so it's not generally available. And I want to remind you that we are a publicly traded company, so you should only purchase products based on what is commercially available right now and not on forward-looking future statements I may make. Then I want to thank you all for joining. I know it's last day, we're all a bit tired, but there's still a few good things that are going to be shared today, so I hope you'll enjoy. Talking about this, there's a typical survey slide. This is, of course, if you want to win coffee, but also it's for us speakers to get some feedback from whatever you thought of our session, whether it's good or bad, we'll take it. Happy to get some feedback there. Today, we're going to do a bit of a tour. We're going to see a lot of different things. I'm not going to go too deep in technical details because each of these items will basically be an entire session on their own. But I want to give you the harbor tour of what's possible in terms of developer experience around Data Cloud and the Einstein features. I'll start with environments, so we'll talk about the different environments you can use to support this experience. I'll talk about the different tools we can use to test these deployments, and then some API integrations. There are a variety of APIs we can use to work with those features. All right. But before I do so, I just want to do a quick refresh. We've seen probably a number of slides with different layers, but that, I think, is a very simplified view of what Agentforce is and how we'll be interacting with it. It's really a three-layered approach. We start with the Salesforce platform that you all already know, I think. On top of this, there's Data Cloud, which is our data store, and which is a foundation also for our Agentforce AI features. Now, Agentforce is a number of things, and for this particular session, we're going to focus really on what is called Agentforce Studio, which is a set of 3 features. It's Agent Builder, what used to be called Copilot. It's Prompt Builder, which you probably heard about since, I think, the end of last year. And finally, it's Model Builder. We won't talk too much about Model Builder, though. In this session, I'm going to focus mainly on the features that are really developer-centric, I would say. So, Data Cloud, Agent Builder, and Prompt Builder, these are the things we'll really focus on today. All right, so let's get started now with environments. So, when you want to build apps to use those solutions, you need to figure out what are the different environments you're going to use to get from development to production. And there are a number of options depending on technology you use, depending on your preferred approach. Some of the things are possible, some of them are a bit more complicated. So if I start with sandboxes, which is, I would say, your typical development flow, everything is supported as of right now. The last missing item was Data Cloud, which just got added in August. There now is support for sandboxes for Data Cloud. There are some restrictions. I'm going to call them out later in the next slide, but I want to show you that at least for sandboxes, everything is green. Then for scratch orgs, it's a bit more complicated. Scratch orgs weren't implemented at first for everything that is Data Cloud and AI, so there are still some missing features. In particular, we're missing a few things for Prompt Builder. So you can't really use scratch orgs for Prompt Builder. Partners can, however. There's a set of features you need to toggle on. If you have a partner org, you can use scratch org for Prompt Builder. But otherwise, if you're just a regular customer, you'll have to wait a bit more. This is something we're actively working on. There are some prototypes, and it's working. So maybe in a release or so, we'll be able to do everything with scratch orgs as well. So let's go more in details. I mentioned that there are now Data Cloud sandboxes. They're pretty good, but there are a set of limitations that you need to keep in mind when you want to use those Data Cloud sandboxes. In order to use them, it's fairly simple. You just go in your production org, you have a toggle under settings, and you can enable those. And since they're beta, I'm sure there are going to be some changes as we go, but the first thing you need to do is to wait a bit. So when you create your sandbox, there's going to be a provisioning process that kicks in to provision Data Cloud on your sandbox. This takes a bit of time. So that's something I found a bit difficult to work with when you work in CI environments. That's something you'll need to take into account, the provisioning time, whether it's for a scratch org or for a sandbox. The provisioning time for Data Cloud does take a bit of time. And we'll see that it not only impacts Data Cloud, it also impacts the Einstein features if you want to use them, because in order for prompt or agents, I should say, or prompts and agents to work, you do need to have Data Cloud provision. So the time to spin up a scratch org or a sandbox will be a bit longer than for your usual developments. Another thing that is worth calling out for those sandboxes, whenever you have connections with third-party environment, whether it's AWS or some other third-party vendor, you will benefit from the connection. They are going to be copied over from production, but you will lose the credentials. So you'll have to reset the credentials manually. Or you can use APIs, and I'll talk about that later on when we cover APIs. Finally, I think one of probably a drawback, I should say, let's be honest, it's a drawback about Data Cloud sandboxes, is that the consumption of the limits do count towards production. So fair warning, I don't know if this is going to change in the future, but this is something you need to be aware of. What you're doing on your Data Cloud sandbox may affect production in terms of limits and consumption. This is documented, and this is probably going to evolve. So for those of you who are watching us online, if you watch this talk, even recording in 6 months, some of this may not be up to date. So make sure you watch the latest. Then for scratch org, so I mentioned some of it is available, some of it is still missing. This is right now a screenshot of what's currently operational. You'll see in green what is required in terms of features and org settings to enable Data Cloud. There's one feature you need to enable, that's the Customer Data Platform, that's the old name, and Customer Data Platform settings to enable Customer Data Platform. So this kicks in the provisioning process, but it does take some time to get up and running. You may have your scratch org created, but you'll still need to wait, once the scratch org is created, to wait for maybe 15, 20 minutes for Data Cloud to be provisioned along with your scratch org. And then in pink here, we have the settings for Copilot, or I should say agents nowadays. Same thing, there's a feature and a setting that you need to enable. Now again, I want to stress out the fact that even if you have enabled Copilot, or prompt agents, sorry, you do need to wait for the Data Cloud provisioning to be ready. Because if you try to push metadata, like for example, if you try to push prompts or if you try to push agents, you'll get some crazy errors if you don't have Data Cloud fully provisioned. So that's my word of warning. All right, so that's it for environment. We saw scratch orgs and sandboxes, and now we're going to talk a bit about how you can test your development when you're working on these technologies. Now, this is going to be fairly quick because I'm going to be honest, there's still some gaps in what you can do. I'm going to start with Data Cloud first. With Data Clouds, you have several SQL calls that you can make, or SQL call. For SQL call, we have still a big gap right now. These cannot be stubbed. So if you have call to SQL within your Apex code that calls on Data Cloud data, you're going to be stuck for this. So my recommendation in this case is try to limit the number of lines that make those SQL call, and you can try to stub your own code, but you cannot stub directly the system calls that use SQL. That's something still on the roadmap that still needs to be worked on. Now, the bright side of things is that for SQL, however, if you're querying data model objects or DMOs, you can work with a new stub. And you can simulate those calls without having to actually worry about having data in there. It's a bit small on this screen, but essentially there's a new class called a SQL stub provider that lets you catch SQL requests for those DMOs and return whatever you want. It doesn't need to hit the right data, so you can fake any kind of results. And I personally like a lot this pattern, and I hope we extend it to SQL in general, because I think it's really nice when you don't have to create all the test data and you can mock results. In the example I shared here, there's only one row that is being returned. It's not even in database. I'm just simulating an individual object here that I'm returning. You can see in the map on the right side, at the bottom right of the screenshot, and I can write whatever data I want. It doesn't need to be in the system. Now, this is going to be helpful for code coverage, especially because you'll be able to test more of your source code with this. That's a bit that I want to share with Data Cloud. Now I'm going to go back to AI. And for AI, the landscape is a bit different. There's one thing I want to call out, is that unfortunately we don't have any mocking capabilities for everything that is AI right now. This still needs to be developed. I think the roadmap still includes some items around this. I don't have any specific announcements to make, but we know that code coverage is going to be required at some point, so we'll get there. So I'm going to start with prompts. For everything that is prompts, what you can do is test by using this annotation, which is generally not really a good practice. You can allow the see all data annotation to actually test on real data. And you can use the connect API to call out prompts and execute them from Apex. Now, there are two main drawbacks to this approach. First of all, it's time consuming. Calling out a prompt with the connect API takes some time. So if you have a number of prompts that you're calling, the transaction duration may be exceeded. So that's a bit risky here, especially if you have a number of tests that you're doing. And the second thing that I think also is a big drawback is the consumption. When you call your prompt, even in the context of a test, and you use see all data, you're actually making a real call to the LLM, so it does count toward your limits. So be careful not to over-test, because this will be charged at some point. So that's something worth keeping in mind. For agents, it's a bit simpler. For agents, you can actually test your invocable action. If you have Apex that you use for custom agent actions, you can do that. But you won't really hit the AI part. In any case, that's something that we'll have to remind you of, is that whenever you do tests for AI, you have to remember that the results are not what we call stochastic. They're not predefined. You cannot figure out in advance what the AI will return. It's a bit of a black box. So you can, for example, issue 10 times a query, you'll get 10 different results. So there's something that is missing right now in our suite of tools. That's a way to test the prompts. Of course, as an admin, you can go in Prompt Builder, for example, you can run tests, simulate them using Prompt Builder, but that doesn't give you some metrics, that doesn't guarantee the efficiency of what you're entering. And so we're building a new product called Test Center. It's probably going to be out in the next release. That will help you test your prompts and figure out how accurate they are, because we're collecting a number of metrics behind the scenes, and we'll see that when we go cover APIs. There are a number of things that are being collected, like the accuracy, certain factors like toxicity. All of these things are being measured. And with Test Center, we'll be able to have a dashboard of all of these, and we'll be able to refine our prompts to get the best result as possible. It's going to be a fairly manual step at first, and I guess in the future we'll be able to automate this with API calls. All right, I guess we lost the screen. I still have my computer on, so let's see. I can keep on talking, I guess, in the meantime. So that was for test. The next part, I'm going to cover deployments. So we saw how we can test our code, but now that we have code that is working either in the sandbox or in data or in a Scratch org, we can see what's the next step. How do we take this code from our development environment to user acceptance testing, production, etc. And there we go. Thank you. So how do we do this? There are different approaches we can take. I haven't included change sets, by the way, because, well, change sets are really the future, but you can use change sets for everything. So I'm more going to focus on the things that you can use with as part of the DevOps flow, things like the metadata API and packages. For everything that is metadata driven, you have full support for Agentforce. However, there are still some gaps in what you can do with Data Cloud, and we'll see for Data Cloud we have a different approach, not using the metadata API. We have a solution called DataKit, which will work with packaging, which is a bit specific to Data Cloud. Now, one thing that is still not ready at this point, and I don't know if in the room some people are trying to use this, that's unlocked packages. These are not supported by any of our free solutions here, and they're probably not going to be supported in the short term, so don't invest too much in unlocked packages if you have Data Cloud or AI solutions that you want to build. The future is more on managed package than unmanaged package, because these have good support. Now, I want to take a second to talk more about data kits, and we're going to explore what this is. This is something that is, I would say, fairly recent, and the support is still work in progress because it has a number of interesting capabilities, but there are still also some gaps there. Before I talk about data cloud and data kits, I want to talk about the metadata API. There are 5 types that you can use when you work with Prompt Builder or with agents. And I've listed them here for you because the names are not very, say, user-friendly. GenAI functions are custom agent actions. So it's a bit of configuration that points to some apex, some flow, or maybe a prompt. The GenAI planner is the agent configuration. And the agent configuration includes the list of selected actions for a given agent. So it's a fairly simple configuration file that tells you which actions are selected or not. The GenAI prompt template, I think the name is pretty obvious. This is a prompt builder template. This supports all the different prompt template types, although there are some restrictions when you want to use templates that have callouts to flows. Up till very recently, there was a bug with the circular dependency between the flow and the prompt, and it's being worked on right now. So I left the little star there to make sure you're not caught off guard. There might be some issues with circular dependencies. And then there's another prompt metadata property that actually I've never seen used, but it does exist when you look at the metadata report. That's GenAI prompt template activation. You can decide to disable certain standard prompts in your org. I don't really see why you want to do that, but it's an option there, and it can be pre-configured using this metadata type. The newest one and final one is agent topics. It's called GenAI plugin. It's not really a plugin. It's just the configuration of a agent topic. And what this includes is mainly text that gives instructions to the copilot about what it should do and what it should not do. It can decide not to engage into certain conversations, to only focus on one specific part of the business. And that's the text descriptions that are provided to the LLM so that it answers your customer questions or even service agent questions. Now moving on to DataKit. So DataKit is, I think, probably worth an entire session, but I'm going to give you the highlights here. DataKit is the new way to package Data Cloud metadata. And the way DataKit works is a bit like a package, but the DataKit actually fits within a package on its own. So for example, you take a managed packet or unmanaged package, it will have a DataKit within it, and the DataKit can take a number of metadata types from Data Cloud. You'll have to select whatever you want to put in there, and once you install the package which holds the DataKit, you will then have to do another round of deployment to select the components from DataKit and activate it in your target org. Now, there is something that is very specific about DataKit. It goes in a package, but you cannot mix the package with DataKits and other regular metadata. That's current restrictions about this. So it's, if you have other things you want to deploy, you'll have to separate them in other packages and build multiple packages. Just like I mentioned earlier, if you have connections, for example, if you're connecting to AWS or to third-party connectors, you will have to re-specify your credentials because the DataKit does not hold credentials. So it will have all the connection information apart from username, password, for example. You can reset those later, and you can use APIs to do so. Now, when you have your DataKits installed in your target org, how do you actually use it? You'll have to deploy the components from DataKit. You don't have to deploy all of them. You can be picky about whatever you want to deploy. It can be a data bundle. It can be just a connection, calculated inside. You can pick from the DataKit and install whatever you want in the order you want. And to do that, there are two options. You can either do this manually. There are, in all the dialogues for all of these metadata types, like for example, a data stream bundle, there's always an option to create from a DataKit, which will let you do it through clicks, but that's not something that will scale well. So the other option, I think, which is newer and more interesting, there's a flow called a DataKit component deployment flow that is providing you access to a Salesforce flow that will let you select the components from your DataKit that you want to deploy. It works like this. So the flow is a standard flow, but is already pre-installed in the org. You can still see the flow diagram to explore a bit the components. You shouldn't try to kind of change it, but it lets you explore a bit how this is implemented behind the scenes. And the way you call this flow out is either through Apex or through the APIs. And within this flow, you don't have, I would say, the full support of what's in the DataKit. There are only certain types that are supported. Data stream bundle, data lake object, data transform, calculate inside. So that's an interesting one. I left the question mark here because right now, as I'm speaking today, there's still an active bug on this one, so it won't deploy. But I guess it's work in progress. There's no GA beta status on the deployment flow, but it's been still worked on, so I guess it will iterate. There are numbers of known bugs still that need to be fixed. So I mentioned you can call this with Apex or with APIs. You cannot do this, you cannot trigger this flow manually from within the user interface. That's because it requires, I would say, complex configuration, so you cannot do this from the UI. Now, how do you call it? Well, I have actually a good DevOps tips for you. I mentioned you can do this with the API, but now with the Salesforce API, with the Salesforce CLI latest version, there is a new API command which is in beta that lets you call directly the REST APIs of the Salesforce platform. So what you can do as part of your DevOps flow is to trigger this dedicated deployment flow from the CLI by calling an API to do so. And here, what I've shared in this screen is the command that you can use to call out the flow. So it's a specific REST API call to trigger a flow. It calls actions, custom flow, then the API name of your flow. So here it's broken down in multiple lines, but everything that is related to this dedicated deployment flow is part of the SF DataKit namespace, and the name of the flow is then deploy DataKit components. And then it's a post request, and you can see what it takes as a parameter. This bit of JSON is telling us what are the components that we want to deploy from the DataKit. Again, we can be picky, we can decide not to deploy everything, we can select whatever we want. And these are the settings that you can use. Now, unfortunately, you cannot set directly the credentials there. For example, here you see I've deployed a new S3 connection here. It's still missing the connection credentials. So I'll have to do another API call after this to set those credentials, the username, password, sorry, I should say the access key and access secret. But still, you can automate a number of these steps, and I think it's pretty valuable. The other option would be to replicate all of this with the Connect API and trigger the flow in Apex as well. You can use anonymous Apex if you prefer, or regular Apex to do the end of the setup process. That's it for the deployment options. I'm going to talk and finish with API integrations. And this is a rich topic because there are a good number of APIs you can call to automate things with Data Cloud and our agents features. So first, let's start again with Data Cloud. There are two main APIs that you can use here. There is the direct API, which is legacy. And I will call it out. It is complex in terms of authentication because it requires you to authenticate twice. First on the Salesforce platform and then on the AWS endpoint. So I wouldn't recommend to use it. It's interesting for certain legacy API calls, but the future is really the second one, the Connect API. Both of these APIs are shared in our Postman collection. I'll of course share the links to those things, but we use Postman to give examples of all of these API requests. If you're not familiar with Postman, it's an API platform, and we use the client side of it to let you try those APIs. So you'll see pre-filled templates in what we call collections, a group of requests that let you try those APIs. And with this, you can explore really everything that is documented, essentially. If you do find something, you can then build on those examples and add your own as part of this. So these two are already part of our set of resources on Postman, and you can look forward to using them. Now, one thing that I want to share, sorry, it's a bit small, is one API request here, for example, to set the connection credentials. When you deploy with your DataKit, you remember you have to add another API call to set the credentials of your connection. This is typically how you would be doing it, calling a connections resource on the Data Cloud Connect API to set the missing credential after the deployment of your DataKit package. So this is just another example of the things you can do. This can be integrated as part of your DevOps cycle, and you can also call these with the Salesforce CLI to automate further the deployment and configuration of your Data Cloud projects. Now, moving back to AI, there are a number of things you can do to call prompt templates. You can call prompt templates within the flow, so it's the declarative approach. It's easy. There's an invocable action that comes along with all of your flows, so you can easily call them from this. You can also use Apex. And in Apex, you have access to the Connect API namespace. The code here is super small, so don't try to read it here. I will share all of this in resources. I don't want to spend too much time on the code itself. But it's a bit verbose, but you can really call any kind of prompt template from the Apex Connect API. And you can specify, of course, dynamic parameters to do the grounding as needed. And finally, the third option to call those prompt templates is to use the Salesforce platform APIs. And here I shared another example, but it's part of our Postman resources. You can call the Connect API for the platform APIs to run those prompts programmatically. So if you have, for example, a third-party integration, you can call those prompts from outside of the platform and run them. Now, what's interesting is that you have the ability to call prompts from Prompt Builder from within the platform, but you also have another API that lets you do something very similar. That's the Models API. The Models API is another way for you to call a prompt from an LLM, but is not directly tied to your Salesforce metadata. So this one is interesting because you can, for example, call directly ChatGPT or OpenAI through the Salesforce APIs without going through your custom agents or actions. How does it work? Here I've taken an example in which we have a third-party application. So here, this one looks like Lightning Web Component, but it could be an application built with React or in another portal, or maybe an integration in some Python application, doesn't really matter. You can build your own UI and you can call the LLM through the Model API. It will still go through the Einstein trust layer, so we're gonna do the typical data masking, the toxicity detection, the prompt injection defense, all these services that are provided from the Einstein trust layer, and then it will hit behind the scenes the Salesforce secured LLMs. Now there are three types of LLMs you can call this way. There are the ones that are managed. That's the ones that are pre-installed in your org. They're coming as a default. This can be OpenAI, this can be Cloud, and a number of others. And then there are some managed models with shared trust boundaries. So these are partner models that can be deployed additionally. And in the future, there's going to be a third and last option. You'll be able to do buy your LLM or bring your own LLM, and you'll be able to plug in whatever LLM you want, even if it's your own trained locally LLM, and add it so that it's exposed through the Models API. I mentioned we wouldn't be talking too much about Model Builder here, but I just want to share one slide about this. If you go in your Data Cloud, if you're in your Data Cloud application in your Salesforce org, there is a tab called Einstein Studio, and from Einstein Studio, you're going to be able to see all of the different LLMs that are exposed to your org. Again, these are the ones that are Salesforce managed, and also the ones that are coming from partners. And in the future, you'll be able to add your own LLM, and basically we'll be able to inject an open API specification to connect to whatever LLM you have, whether it's local LLM or something you're building as part of your development. So that's the future. This is something that is really interesting because you're going to have a lot of options. And the advantage of the Models API is that it adapts with all the models. It's a unified API that lets you call any of these LLMs in a configurable way. So how do you call it? Well, there are two ways to call it. You can call it within the platform by using, again, the Connect API in Apex. Or you can try also the REST API. There is a dedicated API for the Models API. And here we also have it as a collection on our Postman workspace. And since I have a bit of time, I'll show you a quick demo of how this works. And we're going to hit Postman, and we're going to try to use this Models API. So let me step away from the slides for a second, and I'm going to show you how this works. So we're now in Postman. I have forked my collection from my main workspace. I'm going to retrieve an access token. Oh, my screen is a bit frozen for some reason. Oh. Let me relaunch Postman. It seems like it died on me. Maybe this is why we got the black screen a minute ago. Oh, okay, Postman just crashed. Interesting. There we go. Let me relaunch this thing. Bear with me a second. And we're back. Okay, so how does it work? You have to create a connected app to share authentication, and then once you're in, oh, it was updating, that's why. Then once you're in, you just go in your authorization tab, get a new access token. I've already set my credentials in there, so it should be accepting my request. Oh, this is super slow. Wonder what it does. Okay, well, the demo gods may have stricken down. I don't know. Let me try again. There we go. Weird. Anyways, so I got an access token. I'm going to use it, and then I'm going to be able to explore some of the endpoints. The Models API is not a complex API. It only has 4 resources that you can use. The first one is, I would say, the easiest one to understand. That's generate text. You send a prompt, text-based prompt to the LLM, and it gives you a response. So that's good, but it's not as powerful. The second one is very interesting because it allows you to create a chat, meaning a set of prompts and responses with built-in context. So for example, you can ask a first question and you get a response back from the LLM, and then you can fine-tune the response, say, okay, now can you expand a bit on this topic? Okay, now I want to know something else. And it will keep the context of the conversation as it goes. And there are two other endpoints on this API, generate embeddings, which lets you create embeddings when you have RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, if you build a more complex solution. Not all the LLMs support this, so I won't be showing it here. And the final endpoint is submit feedback. It lets you give feedback to the LLM to say whether something was accurate or not. So for this demo, I'm just going to show you something very simple. I'm just going to call the generate text, so sending a single prompt, and I can ask it a question. So for example, here I will ask, what is Dreamforce, for example, and hopefully the LLM will return a response. So how does it work? Before I call the Models API, I want to show you one parameter which is important. That's the model name parameter that is in my request here. And in this example, I set it to use a model name that is configured at the collection level. And this is where I actually select which LLM I'm going to call. Here I'm using the default setting, GPT 3.5 Turbo, but I can pick any of the LLMs that are configured in my org. So I can be calling OpenAI, but I can also be calling Cloud. I can call any of the LLMs that are in fact listed in this screen here. They all have an API name, so I can call Azure, I can call any of them, even the ones that I'm going to be adding custom, whether it's Bedrock or Vertex. I'll be able to call them by just specifying the right model name here in my API call. So let's say we're happy with default, the ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo. I'm going to be able to hit send request, and I'll get a response. And this is the response that ChatGPT gave me. It knows a bit about Dreamforce, so it's able to tell me that Dreamforce is our annual conference, which is good. And so you see how you can expose AI features outside of the platform in a very simple manner. All right, back to our slides. Oops, there we go. I still have just a few more and almost done. So we saw how you can use the models, whether the built-in ones or the ones that are added custom, through the use of the Models API. And Postman, again, is a great tool because it lets you try those API requests without having you to write code. If you're happy with those, you can then see there's a code generator feature in there which lets you spit out code for the request you wrote. So it's a good time saver there. Now, I want to call out some differences between prompt builder, or calling prompt templates, and the Models API, because they really look alike. In the end, you're going to be entering prompts, but they don't really behave exactly the same way. They both go through the Einstein trust layer, but they have different purposes. Prompt templates rely on metadata. So they rely on some text, but it's combined with merge fields. So they have access to object fields, they have access to related lists, they have access to your organization information. They can even call flow or call Apex within their prompt definition thanks to merge fields. They're built declaratively. No code is required to build a prompt template. Now, what is nice is that since you are grounding your data, your prompt with your org data and your org metadata, you do not need to fetch this data and metadata. It's all being automatically retrieved and injected in your prompt for you. If you go with the Model API, however, it's free text, so it's going to be your job to figure out what you want to inject that is dynamic within your prompt. Because you just have access to free text, it's your job to load the merge fields, to load the text, the records that you will be using for your prompt. And that part can be tricky because when you do this, you want to pay attention to data access. You don't want to share records or objects or fields that the end user should not have access to. So I think that's a good benefit of Prompt Builder. It takes care of the security and retrieving data for you. Now for prompt templates, there's also another significant difference. The LLM that is tied to a prompt build in Prompt Builder is set at the metadata level. It doesn't change, it's always the same for a given prompt. Of course, you can edit the metadata, deploy a new version of the template, but you cannot decide on the fly when you call the prompt template which LLM you're going to be calling. In certain cases, it's interesting to be able to change the LLM, and that's what the model builder does. For model builder, each and every single request can run on a different model. So you can be comparing results or maybe running the same prompt on 3 different LLMs in parallel and doing some aggregation if you wanted to. So there's a bit more flexibility with the models API because you can really fine-tune the model at runtime, really. But otherwise, there are 2 interesting approaches. The models API is still expanding. It's fairly new. Prompt templates have been there for some time already, so they're pretty reliable. That's it for this long tour of all the different features. I wish we had more time to dig more into each of these specific features, but I think I gave you a good overview of what's possible, what's in the works, and what's not there yet. So to sum it up, we saw environments, test, deployment, and API integrations. So I'm just going to call out the main things that are, I would say, limitations out of now. For Scratch orgs, prompt Scratch orgs are still missing, where only partners have access to those yet in Scratch orgs. So this is going to come next. For Data Cloud, the main, I would say, limitation is the time it takes to provision the Data Cloud instance. When you create a Scratch org or a sandbox, you have to be especially cautious about this because, again, if you use even AI features, which doesn't seem to be related to the Data Cloud, you do have to wait for your Data Cloud instance to be fully provisioned. So that's something we experienced a number of times. We had customers having issues with those. They were trying to get to run prompts because they had access to Prompt Builder, they had access to the entire user interface. It looked like it was ready, but behind the scenes, Data Cloud was still provisioning, so that's kind of dangerous. For tests, well, there's a lot of work there, to be honest. We are waiting for more stubbing options there, and hopefully solutions that don't require us to call real production or real data on the org. Deployment, Data Cloud clearly is the future. The Data Kit component deployment flow is still work in progress. There's still some gaps. Not all the metadata types are covered there, but the support is expanding. And expect to see a lot more things come in this space because this is clearly the future for Data Cloud. There's still some bugs there, so if you do find bugs, make sure you let us know because the team is actively working on fixing those. The only thing I think that I have no real drawback, but is actually working very good, is APIs. There are a lot of options there. Everything works pretty well, so I'm very happy on the API side of things. They're really easy to try to learn. Yeah, that's really in a nutshell what I wanted to share with you all today. The resources, that's the important bit. Everything that I covered today, the code samples, the documentation, the link to the Postman collection, whether it's the Data Cloud Direct, Data Cloud Connect, the Models API, the SaaS Platform APIs, all of this is in there. You also have a link to a Trailhead badge. There is a specific Trailhead badge that will actually let you try everything I explained today. We have a new sample app called Coral Cloud, and it's an app built on Data Cloud in agents, so Prompt Builder in agents. So you'll be able to try out the metadata deployment flow, you'll be able to experiment with it, and what's really nice with this Trailhead badge is that you get access to a trial org with all of these features enabled, so you can explore, try the sample app, and even build your own extension of it. So all of this is behind this QR code there, and you can try it out anytime. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have feedback, well, I'll be taking questions, but you can also provide feedback through the survey slide here. I'll be here taking questions. Thank you so much.